World War I, the Schlieffen Plan. World War II, the Maginot Line. The Cold War, the Berlin Wall, the Iron Curtain, the Bamboo Curtain. Again and again in this 20th century, to create security, we sought to create walls, and then we would attack each other's walls. And we saw this continuous process of attrition. There has to be a better way to approach this, and it took a shocking lesson to begin to teach us that threat today does not respect walls. And this was the shocking lesson. And we stand here today on the 11th anniversary of 9/11, where we learned that we can't build walls to keep out threats. On 9/11, that was my office, right there. I was a newly selected one-star officer. I was working in the Navy budget world, watching television, and suddenly following the events in New York, and then this attack. And I'm obviously lucky to be standing here having this conversation with you tonight. What I took away from that, what your generation intuitively understands, is that we can't build a wall to keep out this kind of threat. We need a new approach for 21st century security. One of the things that is working very well in Afghanistan is our ability to draw international private sector companies in to open businesses, to create the economic base that will create the future for a place like Afghanistan. So international, interagency, and private public will be part of your voyage. And let me give you a practical example of this. Let me tell you a story from Afghanistan. This is a photograph of Afghan army troops, and they're all standing in a line and they're holding books. And you ought to say to yourself, if you're following Afghanistan at all, well, that's odd. Why are a bunch of Afghan troops holding books? Because the literacy rate in the Afghan security forces is only about 20%. Only 20% when they enter can read. And that is because the Taliban withheld education from this age cohort. Now in their 20s and 30s, they were never allowed to learn to read. So we get back to the image. So, Admiral, why are all those Afghans, 80% of whom can't read, why are they all holding books? And the answer is because they're on their way to literacy class, because we're teaching them to read. This is that comprehensive approach. Now, we are certainly teaching them to fight, and they are taking casualties 5 times higher than we are, and they are going to win back their country. But part of your voyage will be this kind of unconventional approach that goes beyond combat to include this kind of comprehensive and creative approach, because in the end, this may be the most lasting thing we will do in Afghanistan, where we are educating 350,000 Afghan security forces in reading. Combat is critical, and I'll talk more about that momentarily. But I would argue when this kind of thing happens, that creates security for the United States. This young boy is Nicaraguan. His mother walked for 3 days to bring him to the comfort, to the eye clinic there. He was terribly myopic. In other words, he could not see things in the distance. When they put him for the first time in those glasses, he said in Spanish to to his mother, Mama, veo el mundo. Mom, I see the world. Now that is security for the United States, because it is a demonstration of our military's ability to create competent, compassionate, professional care. That helps create security. So my point is, even as you prepare to launch, and you will begin by learning those combat skills, I guarantee you, as you sail along, you will find yourself engaged in this international, interagency, private-public kind of collaboration, not because that's a nice thing to do, but for the pragmatic and real reason that that's what creates security for the United States. Because we know that building walls doesn't work. We have to build bridges and be networked into this modern world. Now let me just hit a very fundamental bell before I wrap up, because I've talked a lot about the comprehensive approach and private-public partnering and interagency and international, teaching people to read and hospital ships. I would not want anyone to leave Alumni Hall tonight failing to understand that this academy exists to create instruments of war. These are warships. That's what we call them. The mission of the Navy and the Marine Corps is to conduct prompt and sustained combat operations at sea. That is who we are and what we do. But I would argue that life is not an on and off switch. We don't load up those ships and send them to sea and launch Tomahawk missiles and launch Standard missiles and do boardings and do all those things. We don't turn the switch on and then just simply say, switch off, go back and sit at the pier. In other words, and you know this in your own lives, life is not an on and off switch. Life is a rheostat. And you will find in your career that we're going to dial that rheostat. And there are going to be times when we ask you to go into combat, into harm's way. You will see shipmates die. That is war, and you will be part of it. It is highly unlikely that you will not practice that part of your profession. On the other hand, there will be times when you are at this part of the scale, when you are conducting all the other things we talked about tonight. And your lives are going to be complicated in ways that mine perhaps was less so in the relatively simple bipolar world of the Cold War. You must operate across that spectrum from hard power to soft power. And that ability to turn that dial, what we ask of you is smart power. You will be up to that, and you will do very well. But it will stretch you, and it will be part of your voyage. So last slide. Wikipedia. Everybody's on Wikipedia like 50 times a day, right? I know I am. You know, if I want to know how many people died at Stalingrad per day in the battle, I'm on Wikipedia. It is the largest compendium of knowledge ever created. But, and you all know this, Wikipedia is not created by 12 really bright people sitting in a room somewhere, right? Wikipedia is created by millions of people every day inputting, millions of people adding knowledge to this enormous database. And every day, tens of millions of people draw that knowledge out. It is a perfect metaphor for the simple fact that no one of us is as smart as all of us thinking together. No one person, no one nation, no one alliance, no one organization, no one battalion. No one of us is as smart as all of us thinking together. There's a lesson here. The vision statement of Wikipedia is very instructive, and it's very simple. The vision is a world in which every human being can freely share in the sum of all knowledge. A world in which every human being can freely share in the sum of all knowledge. My thesis for you tonight, as you prepare to embark on the gorgeous voyage of your lives and your career, is that together, shoulder to shoulder, as guardians, you will help create the sum of all security for the United States of America. Thank you. It's been a pleasure being with you tonight. Thank you. Thank you.